The room was silent when they dragged him in, bound by rough metal cuffs and bruised from the last test. The aliens filled the tribunal chamber with their glittering robes, each one sitting higher than the last, looking down at him as if he was already dead. Their words echoed like knives, cold and sharp, describing his fate in a language he barely understood. But the tone was clear. They were sending the human to die. Beyond the mountains of that distant alien world, something monstrous was waiting, a creature they themselves feared, a beast born from a planet that swallowed fleets whole. The council called it a test of strength, but everyone in the room knew it was an execution wrapped in ceremony. Humans were considered too weak to survive what lived in that forest, and they wanted to make an example of him, to remind the galaxy what happens when a species defies the council. The human didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes burned with something the aliens didn't have, a quiet, stubborn rage that sat deep in his chest. When they loaded him onto the transport ship, even the guards refused to make eye contact. They thought they were sending a man to his grave. But they didn't understand what kind of creatures humans really were. The dropship landed in silence, its engines hissing against the thick alien air. Towering trees wrapped the landscape in shadows, their roots as wide as starships. No birds sang. No wind whispered. Only the distant, guttural growl of something old and terrible, something watching. The alien soldiers threw his pack at his feet, laughed, and locked the gates behind him. There would be no rescue, no way back. The hunt had begun. And yet, instead of panic, the human stood there for a long moment, scanning the tree line, breathing in the air like someone tasting the challenge. He had no armor, no weapons, no help. But humans never needed the perfect conditions to survive. They made survival out of nothing. As night fell, the sound of the beast crawling through the forest came closer. Bones breaking branches, breath like steam. Most creatures in the galaxy feared the dark. But humans were born in it. He melted into the shadows like smoke, moving low and silent, counting the rhythm of the beast's approach, listening for the difference between hunger and hunting. When it struck, it came like thunder, a mountain of muscle and fangs taller than a tank, jaws wide enough to crush a hovercraft in a single bite. The aliens watching from orbit were already preparing their celebration. The council chamber broadcasted the hunt live, expecting a quick and bloody end. But the feed didn't show what they expected. The human didn't run blindly. He didn't scream. He vanished. The creature roared in confusion when its first strike hit only air. He moved like a whisper between the roots, using the terrain, using the creature's own weight against it. This wasn't a soldier they sent to die. This was a human, a predator built by a brutal world where weakness meant extinction. Hours passed. The alien monitors caught flashes of movement, heat signatures flaring and disappearing like ghosts. Some delegates leaned forward nervously. The Dominion warlord hissed that it was impossible. No one survived the beast. But in the dark of that forest, the human climbed the massive back of the creature like it was a mountain, driving a jagged shard of its own claw into its hide. It roared, thrashing, but he didn't let go. He whispered to it, not with fear, but with defiance. The alien observers didn't hear the words, but they saw the impossible unfold. The beast, once a weapon of fear, knelt in the mud, bleeding, broken, but not killed. The human had tamed the thing they worshipped as a monster. 3 days later, when the gates opened for the retrieval unit to collect what they assumed was a corpse, they froze. The ground shook before they saw him. And then out of the black forest, the human emerged walking slowly, his face covered in dried mud and blood, his cuffs torn off like paper. But what made every alien drop their weapons was not him. It was the beast behind him, towering, its massive head lowered, moving like a trained animal at his side. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Guards raised their rifles, but the creature didn't attack. It waited, silent, loyal. The human had returned from the place no one came back from, dragging their nightmare into the light as if it were a dog on a leash. The high speaker stood frozen, its thin hands trembling. This wasn't supposed to happen. No one, not even the Dominion's greatest warriors, had survived that creature. And yet here stood a single human, a species they called fragile, proving once again why the galaxy feared their kind even when it pretended to mock them. Word spread like fire through the stars. One man, one beast, one impossible story. Colonies whispered it in the dark. Soldiers on distant front lines told it around campfires. And on dozens of worlds where humans were still treated like tools, hope cracked the silence like glass. If one human could tame the galaxy's terror, what else could they do if pushed too far? The Council tried to bury the footage, calling it an anomaly, but the truth had already escaped their control. The human became a symbol. Not a king, not a warrior, but a reminder of what humanity truly was. A creature that refuses to die on anyone's terms but its own. The Council called him back into the chamber. This time not as a prisoner but as a threat they couldn't name out loud. The High Speaker asked him how he'd done it. He didn't answer. He simply turned to the beast that now followed him like a shadow, rested a hand on its skull, and smiled faintly. That smile made the Council's blood run cold. They realized in that moment that what they'd unleashed couldn't be controlled, couldn't be calculated in equations or strategy. Humanity didn't just survive. They adapted. They turned every weapon thrown at them into something that served their will. The High Speaker tried to posture, to threaten him, to remind him of the Council's power. But the alien's voice shook. And when the human finally spoke, his words were simple and quiet. Next time, choose something bigger. The beast growled softly at his side as he walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a silence heavier than any explosion. The Council didn't follow. They didn't dare. In the following weeks, rumors spread faster than fleets could move. Some said the humans had a new army of beasts. Some said they had learned to turn fear itself into a weapon. The truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that no one looked at humanity the same way again. The aliens, who once saw them as fragile, now watched the shadows, wondering what else they'd underestimated. The human didn't return to Earth. He vanished into the edges of space with the creature at his side, traveling through worlds that once would have hunted him. Now, they let him pass. Fear, after all, is the sharpest armor in the galaxy. The Council tried to spin the story, to call it luck, but every alien who saw that man walk out of the forest with the beast at his side knew the truth. Humanity didn't fear monsters, they befriended them. They turned death into loyalty. They made the galaxy's nightmares their companions. And in the heart of every council chamber, a new and dangerous thought began to grow. If one human could do this, what would happen when all of humanity stopped holding back? Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, share, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful HFY sci-fi stories where humanity refuses to break. The aliens couldn't believe their own eyes when the broadcast resumed. For hours they had waited, laughing in their seats, expecting the humans' death to be quick and brutal. But the forest feed showed something else entirely. Tracks twisted in ways no prey should have made. Signs that the hunter had become confused. The High Speaker leaned forward, tapping its thin claws on the table as silence fell across the entire chamber. "Why hasn't it finished him yet?" one delegate hissed. No one answered. The beast was feared throughout the galaxy, bred to kill without mercy, a living weapon that didn't fail. Every race in that council had lost soldiers to that monster at some point in history. It didn't know mercy. It didn't spare. But deep beneath that alien canopy, a single human was doing something none of them expected. He was adapting. He didn't have their claws, their armor, or their advanced senses. What he had was something older. Something colder. He had patience. While the beast prowled through the forest, snarling through the undergrowth, he learned its rhythm, the weight of its steps, the moment it paused to scent the air, the places it circled twice before committing to a strike. He'd spent a lifetime surviving on a world that didn't care if he lived or died, a world that taught humans how to turn fear into fuel. He used the forest itself, marking its trails with small disturbances, leading it into confusion, breaking its patterns until its breathing grew uncertain. For the first time in its existence, the beast felt something it didn't have a name for: hesitation. Back in the observation decks orbiting the planet, alien officers exchanged nervous glances. "He's not dead," one whispered. "He's hunting it." The Dominion warlord barked something sharp, but even its tone cracked. Humans weren't supposed to win these trials. They were supposed to bleed for the galaxy's entertainment. But this one had stopped playing their game. He made his own. By the third night, the alien feeds caught something no one had ever seen. The beast wasn't chasing him anymore. It was following him. The human had found a weakness hidden in its predatory rage, a wound along its flank from an old fight. Instead of finishing it off, he started tending to it with scraps of cloth and fire, not because he pitied it, but because he understood something the Council never did. Monsters respect strength more than fear. He didn't run from it. He faced it. And slowly, as the forest grew quieter, the creature stopped roaring and started watching him. Their breathing fell into the same rhythm. Predator met predator. On the fourth day, when the alien retrieval team finally arrived expecting to collect a corpse, they heard the sound of thunder rolling through the jungle. Then they saw movement. The human walked out of the tree line with blood on his face, not his own, and behind him, like a storm chained to his will, came the beast. Its yellow eyes burned through the mist, but its head was lowered. The creature they feared more than war itself was walking at his side. Not as prey, not as hunter, as his companion. The retrieval squad froze. The high speaker, watching through the live feed, felt its throat tighten. No one had ever returned from the forest. And no one had ever returned with the beast. The alien soldiers aimed their weapons, but the human raised a hand. The beast growled once, and the sound alone made hardened warriors stumble back. "Stand down," he said softly, his voice calm, quiet, dangerous. The retrieval squad hesitated. They didn't know if they were more afraid of the beast or the man standing next to it. He didn't look like prey anymore. He looked like something they'd tried to bury centuries ago. A reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed against the wall. The transport ship was silent on the way back. No guard dared speak. The human sat in the corner with the beast curled beside him like a mountain of muscle and breath. And when the hatch opened on the council platform, the sound of 1,000 gasps filled the air. Entire delegations stepped back. Some clutched their robes. Some whispered prayers. Others simply stared at the impossible sight of their nightmare obeying a human. The high speaker rose slowly, its long fingers trembling. It tried to speak but only managed to rasp. It had ruled with fear its entire life. And in front of it stood someone who had tamed fear itself. Word exploded across the galaxy in hours. Colonies repeated the story like scripture. The Dominion tried to censor the footage, but it was too late. You can't kill a story once it catches fire. They had sent a human to die, and instead he had returned leading their nightmare like a loyal hound. The message was clear in every system, in every whisper between the stars. Humans don't just survive. They conquer the very things meant to break them. In the council chamber, surrounded by the cold stares of alien rulers, the human stood unarmed. The beast loomed behind him like a shadow carved from terror itself. The high speaker's voice was barely more than a whisper. "How?" The human didn't explain. He didn't have to. He simply reached back, placed a hand on the creature's massive skull, and smiled. A small, sharp smile that said everything words couldn't. For the first time in a very long time, the council felt something they had long forgotten. Fear. Not of the beast. Of the human who had tamed it. The council chamber felt colder the following day, not because the air had changed, but because their illusion of control had cracked. Word of the humans' return had spread like fire across the star network, faster than their senses could contain it. Every colony, every military fleet, every back-alley port in the galaxy whispered the same words: he tamed the beast. 4 generations, that creature was the nightmare that even armies feared, the kind of monster parents used in stories to keep their children from wandering at night. And now, that same monster walked at a human's side like a loyal guardian. The high speaker didn't sleep that night. Neither did the Dominion generals nor the Council's secret police. Empires weren't just shaken by fleets or weapons. Empires broke when people stopped believing in their fear. On the upper decks of the Terran holding station where the Council had ordered him kept for observation, the human sat cross-legged on the steel floor, a silent shadow beside him. The beast lay with its massive head resting near his boots, breathing slow, its chest rising and falling like the rhythm of a war drum. Guards watched from a distance, but none dared to enter. It wasn't just the monster they feared anymore. It was him. The way he moved, the way he didn't speak unless he needed to. That kind of quiet wasn't weakness. It was something far more dangerous, a kind of stillness only predators have when they no longer fear anything. Across the stars, old power structures were starting to shift. Miners on frontier worlds who had once been forced to kneel before alien governors now told each other the story. Soldiers in forgotten colonies repeated it around their fires. Merchants, smugglers, scavengers, all carried the tale of a human who walked out of a death forest with the galaxy's nightmare on a leash. And the Council hated it. They called emergency meetings behind locked doors, trying to find a way to control the narrative, to twist it, to bury it. But stories don't belong to rulers once they escape into the world. They belong to the people who need them. Inside the chamber, alien delegates argued in rising voices. The High Speaker slammed its clawed hands down, silencing the room. This cannot be allowed to continue, it hissed. The human must be eliminated, the beast destroyed, and the footage erased from the network. But one of the Dominion warlords leaned back with a low laugh, its scaled mouth curling into something close to a grin. If one human can do this, it said, imagine what happens if more of them try. For the first time in years, the Council wasn't united. Fear had turned inward. Some wanted to kill him, others wanted to use him, and a few, deep down, wondered if they were already too late to stop what he represented. Meanwhile, outside the Council walls, the galaxy was moving. Unaligned colonies, worlds that had long been under the Council's boot, began sending encrypted messages. People who had been ignored, taxed, starved, or abandoned saw something in the human they hadn't seen in generations. A chance. Not because he commanded fleets or armies, but because he proved the Council could be beaten, not by power, but by will. That night, under the low glow of the station's artificial lights, the beast lifted its head as the door hissed open. A single alien entered, a guard who'd been watching in silence for days. He wasn't like the others. His people had been crushed by the Council centuries ago, their resistance broken and forgotten. He stepped forward carefully, hands raised, and whispered, "How did you do it?" The human didn't answer at first. He looked at the creature, then back at the alien guard. "You stop fearing it," he finally said, his voice quiet, steady, carrying the kind of weight no speech could match. "And then you make it fear you." The alien froze, not out of fear but awe. He had spent his entire life believing the Council's stories, that the beast was unstoppable, that humans were weak, that the Council's power was absolute. But the man standing before him had proven that those stories were lies. One person had broken the myth. And once a myth breaks, an empire begins to rot. In the Council chamber the next morning, everything changed when the galaxy itself began to respond. Small colonies raised human flags in quiet corners of space. Broadcasts flooded the network. Footage of the human and the beast walking through the forest was copied, remixed, shared, and amplified beyond control. Propaganda could not silence this. The High Speaker slammed its hands against the table again and again, but the room was no longer listening. One Dominion warlord whispered the words everyone else feared to say aloud, "He's not just a human. He's the spark." On the station, soldiers began to refuse orders to harm him. Ships from distant colonies started to approach the sector, not as invaders, but as watchers. A movement that no one planned was taking shape, a movement built on a story of one man, one beast, and a defiance that no fleet could erase. The human stood on the viewing deck, the beast beside him, looking out at the stars like someone who had already decided he didn't need the Council's permission to breathe. The High Speaker didn't know it yet, but the galaxy was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to the Whispers now, to the broken, the silent, the ones who had been afraid. And those Whispers all carried the same message: if he could do it, maybe we can too. The beast huffed softly, and the human rested his hand against its thick skull, the quiet gesture of a man who had already changed everything without ever meaning to. And somewhere deep in the Council's heart, for the first time in centuries, real fear began to grow. Not of the beast, but of the humans who were no longer afraid of monsters. The council tried to keep the story contained, but the galaxy had already moved past their control. The tale of the human and the beast had become something far larger than a military incident. It was a symbol, whispered in shipyards, in crowded mining domes, on transport freighters and outer colonies where no one believed in heroes anymore. Even worlds that once feared to speak against the council were now talking, quietly at first, then louder. A myth was growing, and it was real. The council could crush fleets, silence planets, and burn out resistance. But it had never figured out how to kill a story. And this story was spreading like wildfire. The High Speaker's voice cut through the grand chamber like broken glass. This is not a legend. This is a threat, it hissed, its clawed hands curling against the smooth metal table. The alien delegates around the curved chamber spoke over one another in frantic bursts, blaming each other, arguing over who had allowed the transmission to reach the outer systems. The Dominion warlord slammed a heavy fist on the table and growled, "You can't control fear once it changes sides. That human has turned the monster we built into a symbol." And that was the heart of it. They hadn't just lost a soldier, they'd lost control of the very creature they once used to enforce fear. On the outer rings of council space, cargo ships began to ignore orders, choosing instead to fly under independent banners. Colonies that had kept their heads down for generations started sending coded messages to the Terran sector. Even species long crushed under the Council's iron hand began to dream quietly of something else, something dangerous, freedom. It wasn't an army that started this shift. It was one man, one beast, one impossible act. Meanwhile, deep inside the Terran station, the human stood beside the creature in the observation bay. The beast had stopped snarling at the guards. It stood calm, massive, and quiet beside him. Every soldier, engineer, and technician who passed by slowed their steps when they saw the pair. There was something in the way they moved together, an unspoken language between predator and man. He hadn't chained the creature, and yet it followed. It didn't obey out of fear. It followed out of respect. The guards didn't understand it, but they could feel it. That was enough to make their hands shake. Then the message came in, a burst transmission from a colony 3 sectors away. Council forces were moving to crush small uprisings inspired by the story of the Beast Breaker. That's what they had started calling him. The message was desperate. The colony had no weapons, no fleet, nothing to defend itself with. Just people who had dared to whisper the wrong name. The commander of the Terran outpost found him in the observation bay. "They're going to make an example of them," the commander said. "That's how the council works." The human didn't respond with a speech or outrage. He just turned his head, looking down at the beast, and something in its huge yellow eyes seemed to understand. It rose slowly, a wall of muscle and breath, and the room went silent. When the Terran dropship lifted off the station, it carried no army. Just him and the creature. The colony hung like a fragile ember in the void, its broken defense grid blinking like a dying heart. The Council had sent shock troops, elite Dominion enforcers known for burning out resistance before it could take root. Their gunships hovered low over the colony's surface, ready to turn whispers into ash. But that night, they saw something they hadn't prepared for. The dropship cut through the clouds without running lights, silent as a ghost. It landed in the old quarry outside the colony perimeter. When the hatch opened, the beast walked out first, its heavy claws sinking into the wet ground, steam rising from its breath. Dominion soldiers froze. This was the creature they once unleashed against entire battalions. But it wasn't attacking them. It stood beside the human who followed calmly behind it, like a storm with a heartbeat. For a moment, the battlefield forgot itself. Then the first Dominion commander barked an order, trying to cover the fear in his voice. "Kill the beast." But the soldiers hesitated. The thing they'd feared their entire lives was standing still, and next to it was a human who looked like he had already died once and come back different. When they finally fired, they aimed at the wrong target. The beast moved like thunder, slamming through the first line of soldiers before they could blink. It didn't attack blindly. It fought like something that had learned from a human. Precise. Controlled. Unstoppable. The colonists watched from the shadows as Dominion gunships tried to lift off, only to be dragged down by claws like iron hooks. The human moved with quiet certainty, not giving commands, only guiding. And when the last Dominion ship fell silent, the colony didn't cheer. They stared in stunned silence at the man and the monster standing over the battlefield like two sides of the same coin. No speech was needed. The message was already written in the broken ground. The Council's nightmare belongs to humanity now. Back in the Council chamber, emergency reports came in one after another. The High Speaker listened in silence as system after system lit up with unrest. The colony hadn't just been defended. It had inspired others. More people whispered. More people stopped fearing the monster. Fear was no longer the Council's weapon. It was humanity's. The High Speaker whispered something the chamber had never heard before. We should have killed him when we had the chance. But it was already too late. Across the stars, people were choosing sides, and they weren't choosing the Council anymore. The human stood beneath the night sky of the liberated colony, the beast beside him, its massive head lowering gently as he rested a hand against its skull. It wasn't just a bond. It was a warning to every empire built on fear. Humanity does not bow. The wind carried the quiet murmurs of the colonists, their voices rising slowly like a spark turning into flame. And somewhere deep in the darkness of space, the Council realized the unthinkable. They hadn't just failed to kill a human. They had accidentally created a legend. The galaxy was holding its breath. The Council's silence after the colony incident was not mercy, it was calculation. Across the stars, whispers of rebellion grew louder, but the old powers were far from broken. The High Speaker had spent decades maintaining control through fear, through stories of monsters no one could face. Now the story had been rewritten. The monster belonged to a human. Fear had switched sides. And that was something no empire could tolerate for long. In the shadows of their cold citadel, they prepared their response. Not with speeches. Not with negotiations. With war. They didn't plan a frontal assault. The Council had learned a long time ago that when humanity was cornered openly, they became something unstoppable. This time they chose a different path. A quiet strike designed to kill a legend before it became a movement. They sent assassins cloaked in silence, infiltrators from the Dominion, spies from the syndicates, hunters bred to eliminate symbols before they grew too strong. They didn't need to destroy his army. They just needed to kill him. Because in their minds, if they cut off the head, the whispers would die. What they didn't understand was that this wasn't about a single man anymore. He had already become something larger than his own life. The night over the liberated colony was quiet. Cold winds moving over the rocky hills where the humans stood beside the beast. The people were still repairing their broken structures, still learning to breathe without fear. But somewhere beyond the ridgeline, silent dropships fell through the clouds like shadows. No lights, no alarms, no warning. The hunters moved like smoke, creatures built to kill without leaving a sound. But they forgot one thing. Humans don't sleep like prey. He woke before the first assassin reached the perimeter. Years of survival had burned the sound of danger into his bones. His hand brushed against the beast's flank, and instantly the creature rose, the rumble in its chest like distant thunder rolling through the night. Its massive head turned toward the ridge, nostrils flaring. No one else in the colony heard it, but he did. The storm was coming. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked toward it. The assassins thought they were the hunters. They didn't realize they were stepping into someone else's world now. The terrain that was foreign to them was alive to him. He knew every stone, every dark corner, every shift in the wind. And beside him moved the beast, silent and low, its muscles coiled like a weapon waiting to strike. The first Dominion hunter died without ever seeing him. The second caught a glimpse of glowing yellow eyes before teeth closed around his throat. The third, a syndicate sniper, fired once and missed, a mistake that would haunt the last seconds of his life as the human dragged him down into the dirt. The colony woke to muffled echoes of struggle in the dark. When the last assassin gasped his final breath, the beast let out a roar so deep it shook the sky, a sound not of victory but warning. By morning, The colony gathered at the square. The bodies of the assassins lay in a silent row, their black armor cracked and useless. The human didn't speak for a long time. He just looked up at the rising sun, his hand resting against the creature's neck. "They won't stop," he finally said, his voice low, steady, carrying over the crowd like a blade. "This is only the beginning." And the colonists, who once whispered his name in fear and hope, now stood behind him with a different fire in their eyes. Not because they thought he was a hero, but because they realized they didn't have to be afraid anymore. News of the failed assassination spread faster than the council could contain it. More colonies began sending coded transmissions. Ships carrying defectors, smugglers, even low-ranking soldiers who no longer believed in the council started appearing in Terran-controlled sectors. People who had spent their entire lives being silent were picking sides. And for the first time in centuries, those sides didn't favor the council. In their chamber, the High Speaker stared at the reports in quiet fury. "We created that beast to control fear," it hissed. "And now fear bows to a human." One of the Dominion generals slammed its fist against the table. "Then we burn everything. We make the stars remember why they feared us." Plans were drawn in shadows, sieges, purges, entire systems marked to be crushed. They would show the galaxy what happens when anyone dares to follow a human. But humanity was ready in a way the council didn't understand. This was not an army built on power. It was a movement born from pain, forged in the places the council had ignored for centuries. The people the galaxy had forgotten were the ones rising first. And they weren't waiting for orders. They were acting. They were spreading the whispers into roars. That night, as the colony slept under new stars, he sat alone at the edge of the ridge, watching the distant ships flicker like fireflies against the dark. The beast lay beside him, head resting in the dust. His hands were still stained with blood, his mind already hearing the echoes of what was coming. He didn't ask for this war. He didn't want to be a symbol. But he understood something the council never did. Once a story is born, no one controls it anymore. The wind moved through the stones, and he whispered quietly, not to anyone in particular, "They're going to burn the galaxy to stop this." The beast let out a low growl, a sound that was almost a promise. He looked down at it, a small, sharp smile forming on his face. "Then we make sure they choke on the smoke." In the darkness beyond, the council fleets began to gather. The war they feared most wasn't just against a human and a monster. It was against an idea. And ideas, once free, don't die easy. The stars above the colony were unnaturally quiet, as if the galaxy itself was waiting for the first shot. It had been weeks since the failed assassination, and in that silence, everyone knew what was coming. The council wasn't retreating. It was gathering strength in the dark, sharpening its blades where no one could see. Across the galactic network, colonies whispered of massive fleet movements, entire Dominion armies vanishing from their usual patrol routes, syndicate shadow ships disappearing from the border sectors, silent factories roaring back to life. This wasn't punishment anymore. This was war. The human stood on the ridge overlooking the settlement, the cold wind pushing at his worn jacket. Below him, the colony had changed. It was no longer a frightened outpost clinging to survival. It had become a hub, a gathering point. Ships arrived daily, carrying refugees, outlaws, engineers, broken soldiers, and those who simply wanted to be free. These people didn't have shining armor or polished fleets. They had scars, and those scars were enough. Around them, they built barricades, tunnels, hidden bunkers, and defense towers cobbled together from rusted steel and scavenged alien tech. They weren't preparing for a fair fight. They were preparing to survive. Beside him, the beast lifted its head to the horizon, its huge nostrils flaring as if it could smell what was coming. Its yellow eyes glowed faintly in the night, and for a moment, it looked less like a monster and more like something older, a guardian, forged in darkness. He reached down and placed his hand against its massive skull, feeling the steady, powerful heartbeat beneath. "They are coming," he whispered. The creature rumbled low in its throat, a sound that vibrated through the ground like distant thunder. At the edge of council space, the invasion began. Thousands of ships, their hulls dark and silent, emerged from warp like a black tide. Dominion dreadnoughts took the lead, their engines glowing like dying suns. Behind them came Syndicate warships, sleek and predatory, and above all, the towering command vessel of the High Speaker, a symbol of the power that had crushed countless worlds. It wasn't a raid this time. It wasn't a surgical strike. It was the full weight of an empire trying to crush a single story before it devoured the stars. Back on the colony, the Terran commander paced the command deck, surrounded by makeshift holographic displays and exhausted soldiers. "They're not testing us anymore," one officer said, voice tight. "They're going to burn this place to ash." The commander didn't argue. Everyone knew it. The human walked into the room, the beast behind him causing every soldier to straighten instinctively. No one needed a speech. His presence was enough. He had become the rallying point, the living reminder that the Council could bleed. "They'll hit the outer shield first," the commander said. "Then they'll burn through the rest in minutes." The humans studied the display quietly. They didn't have enough ships to match the Council's numbers. They didn't have elite soldiers, or perfect defenses, or grand alliances. But they had something the Council never learned to understand. They had people who refused to kneel. The first wave struck before dawn. Dominion shock troops dropped from orbit like burning stars, slamming into the far side of the colony. The ground shook. Sirens screamed. And still, no one ran. Men and women who had once hidden from the galaxy's cruelty picked up weapons, took their places, and fought like people with nothing left to lose. The beast roared as it charged through the defense line, smashing into the first group of Dominion troopers like a living avalanche. Blood and metal tore through the night. The human moved behind it, fast and precise, striking with the quiet efficiency of someone who had survived too many wars. The Council expected panic. What they found was resistance. Not clean, not pretty, messy, brutal resistance. Colonists used every inch of the terrain to fight back. They turned their mines into traps, their farms into choke points, their homes into fortresses. The beast moved like a storm through their ranks, turning their most feared weapon against them. Every soldier who saw it faltered. This was the monster they'd been taught to fear their whole lives. Now it was fighting for humans. Up in orbit, the High Speaker watched the battle unfold through cold, predatory eyes. It didn't understand how these broken people were holding against its armies. "Burn them," it hissed. "Burn everything." Massive Dominion cruisers shifted position, their cannons aligning toward the colony's heart. It wasn't just going to conquer, it was going to erase them. Down below, the Terran commander shouted into the comms, "We've got incoming from orbit." The human looked up at the sky, his jaw tightening. He knew the Council's way. They'd rather destroy a world than let it inspire another rebellion. And yet, behind him, hundreds of colonists stood their ground. They didn't have time to think. They didn't have time to fear. They only had each other. Then something unexpected happened. As the Dominion ships prepared to fire, other signals began to appear on the scanners. Ships, hundreds of them, emerging from deep space. Old cargo freighters, pirate vessels, broken-down colony ships patched together with scrap metal. Not a fleet in any conventional sense. But behind them flew dozens of banners. Miners, traders, smugglers, defectors, and survivors from 100 forgotten worlds. The whispers had reached them too. They hadn't come to bow. They had come to fight. The first freighter rammed itself into a Dominion gunship and detonated. Others followed. Ragged, desperate, unstoppable. The sky above the colony erupted into chaos. The Council's clean, perfect formation fractured as unexpected resistance hit them from every direction. It wasn't the might of the human fleet that turned the tide. It was the weight of a story carried by everyone who had been afraid for too long. The battle raged for hours. The human and the beast fought side by side, moving through the lines like a blade cutting through rope. The colonists, inspired and furious, pushed the Dominion back step by step. Ships fell, soldiers burned, and somewhere in the middle of it all, the High Speaker realized the truth. It had lost control the moment it tried to destroy him. When the sun rose, the Council's fleet was shattered. Not defeated completely, They still had power, still had ships, but something far more dangerous had broken. The myth of their invincibility. Across the galaxy, systems that had stayed quiet began to rise. Not for the human's name, not for his beast, but for themselves. Because once fear is broken, control goes with it. He stood at the top of the ridge, armor scorched, blood streaked down his arm, breathing hard as the beast leaned against him. Smoke curled into the morning air, ships burning in the distance, bodies scattered across the battlefield. But the colony still stood. More importantly, its people stood. The commander approached, voice hoarse. "They'll come again," he said. The human nodded slowly. "Let them." His hand rested against the beast's head, its yellow eyes scanning the horizon as if daring the galaxy to try again. Somewhere out there, the council was still alive. But now it was afraid. And the galaxy had finally remembered something the council spent centuries trying to bury. Humanity doesn't kneel, and when pushed into a corner, it doesn't just fight back. It teaches others how to stand. Thank you for listening to this story. If it made your heart race, if it made you believe a little more in the power of defiance, like, share, and tell me your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more HFY stories where humanity refuses to break.